So just want to say I've prepared the presentation today with my colleague Joy as well. So some of the slides come from her. So you've seen presentations throughout the day, and maybe you've seen this morning David Lindenmayer stressed the importance of data and surveys, and then maybe you've seen Kerry Bridle, she showed some maps from the list map that had some data points on there. Darren Kidd from the Tripoli, he had lots of list map showing us in the slides. So my talk today really is about, well, how do you get into that? How can you collect data and how can you access it? And the answer to that questions can be citizen science. And I'll focus, as part of this conference, I'll focus on restoration projects as well. So what is citizen science? Well, generally it means that members from the community collect data, make observations, but then also make it available to scientists, government, or other organizations. So to understand the concept, it's important to remember that it has two parts. So you make an observation, but then somehow it has to go into a database or something else where it can be used further. That's a general definition, but it can also mean just help protect a threatened species. And actually, citizen science data in many cases is vital for that. It can also mean that you just find out what lives in your backyard, or that you connect to some other people and have some fun. There are tasks of all degrees of complexity, quite simple tasks where kids can get involved. You can look for insects, so kids can do that. You can also have very complicated projects like doing an owl survey at night, so that requires a lot more preparation. In the context of restoration, there are a number of areas where citizen science can be important. First of all, to establish a baseline of what's already around. And that's something Kerry Bridle in her presentation stressed as well. So before, maybe you have a project in mind, but before you go out and do something, plant trees or whatever, it's actually good to have an idea of what's there already. So maybe there's a threatened plant, like an orchid or so, and if you just chuck in trees, you could take away the habitat, or maybe you want to remove blackberries, but currently bandicoots are using that as their habitat. So it's a good idea to know what's around first. And second, when you're designing a restoration project, it's always good to check what's around in the area. So what's the plants communities that are growing there? What kind of animals live in the area? And to do that, to be able to do that kind of research, there needs to be that data somewhere that you can look up. And citizen science, on the one hand, gives you the tools to do that kind of research, but if you collect data yourself as well, then you help others to do that. And finally, throughout the lifetime of a restoration project, the tools provided by citizen science, they help you to monitor the progress and also report on outcomes. As a citizen scientist, there are many things to look out for. If you're part of a project, they probably have certain things that are important within that project, but often it also depends on your own interests. So many people have something specific they want to focus on, like some are more interested in plants, others more in fungi. That's totally fine. So go with whatever interests you. Really interesting can be also like long-term changes, climate change or erosion, stuff like that. Having said that, often observations of threatened species can be more vital than other observations. So getting into it, how do you actually do citizen science? And this is only a very brief overview, but hopefully by the end of it, you'll have some sort of idea bit of knowledge of tools, and yeah, the feeling that you actually can go out and do it yourself. So there are a couple of quite easy ways to get involved. One is to set up a motion camera, and yeah, they are pretty easy to deal with, quite cheap these days. Somebody told me yesterday they cost $150 at Bunnings. So yeah, not a big investment, but you get a lot out of it. Couple of key points to keep in mind when setting them up. So there's some kind of general setup here in this graphic. It always depends a bit on the situation, of course, how to set it up, but most cameras have a fixed focus. So whatever you take a photo of needs to be 3 to 7 meters away, roughly. Really important to avoid frustration is to, if you can, not point them at moving objects like grasses, like tall grasses that often move in the wind. Because the way the motion detector works, it's being set up by changes in heat. So if during the day sun shines on the grass and moves in the wind, then that's already enough often to set up the camera, and you just get hundreds or thousands of photos of just grass in the wind and looking through that. Yeah. So you can, there are ways around that, so you can put a time on it. For example, if whatever you're looking for is only active at night, then you just have the camera out at night. So, but yeah, that's really important to keep in mind when you're first starting with that stuff. Really important also is to set on the correct date and time and use good batteries. So correct date and time is important because you want to use the data that you capture further, and without date and time you can't really do that. Identification of animals is a really big topic in itself. So I could spend a couple of hours, I guess, to take you through all the different species that you might see and how to identify them. Just for now, important is to not be too frustrated when you start out, and have a bit of, yeah, take some time, look through many photos, as many as you can when you first start out, a couple of hundred if you can, because it really takes time to get your eye in, and you will notice over time that photos that you first weren't able to identify, you weren't sure if it's a paddymillion or wallaby or potteroo or whatever. If you get the experience, if you look at many, many photos, suddenly you are able to identify these animals. So yeah, just have a bit of perseverance and you'll get your eye in, and then I'm sure it will work. Yeah. Birds are another really good, really important indicator for ecosystem health and biodiversity, and really great to look out for. Usually if you do surveys for birds, you can use your own ears and eyes, of course. A really good way though is to set out a like a microphone recorder, just put it out for 20 minutes or so at a time, and then you can take that recording away and identify the bird voices on there later. There are a couple of good resources to that now. There are apps, YouTube videos, CDs. For the apps, some cost a bit of money, but you get what you pay for. So if you're willing to pay a little bit for an app, then you get a much better product, much more helpful app. There are also like pretty new apps that use AI to identify bird voices. There's one called BirdNet. Been testing that a bit with limited success. So sometimes they actually get the right result, sometimes not. I guess so in Europe or the US they seem to work really well, so I guess they just need a bit more yeah, a bit more time to get the data to feed the AI to identify that, and I'm sure in a couple of years or so it'll work here as well. Moving on to plants. Plants are really important for many reasons. Food, soil, water quality, habitat, and many more reasons. In Tassie, we've got a couple of thousand different species, so when you're first starting out trying to identify plants, it can be really, really challenging. That's why we recommend to focus on 3 broad categories when you just start out. And that's first of all the common species in your area, because they are really the backbone of your ecosystem. You might not care too much about the dogwoods or the stringy barks or whatever, but if you are able to identify these really common species, that already tells you a lot about the ecosystem. Then there's the rare and threatened species that we want to know about so we can protect them, and the weeds so that we can get rid of them. As for the birds, there are now a couple of apps coming up that are supposed to identify plants automatically. So my success has been a bit limited. There's one called PlantNet and seems to work reasonably well on weeds. So yeah, if you want to identify weeds, then that might actually work pretty well. It's worth a try anyway. All right, so if you remember back to the start where I said that citizen science has these 2 parts. First, to make an observation, and then to make it available to others. Well, iNaturalist is the main tool that we want to promote to make observations available to others. And it's really quite simple. It's an app you can download or you can use it on your desktop computer. It's free to use. And the way it works is you can upload an observation, or you can make it through the app, which is to make a photo or make a recording of a sound recording, not a video at the moment. And then you can either identify it yourself if you know what it is, or you can leave it unidentified. And the community within iNaturalist will look at that observation, and they can either confirm the observation, confirm the identification, or they can comment on it or identify it. And yeah, I really like it. I find it quite satisfying. You see something, you upload it, and then you see someone has confirmed it or has commented on it or whatever. So yeah, I think it's really great and easy way. Definitely recommend trying it. So iNaturalist, once an observation is confirmed by 2 members of that community, it's called research grade, and then will be uploaded into various databases. In Tassie, there are a couple of these databases. It's a bit confusing, but I would really recommend to familiarize yourself with the list map, and you can just access it through your web browser. It's called a map, but it's really a lot more than that. It's like an interface to access huge amounts of data. So definitely go on that website, and the main thing that you need to learn is to access or put layers on the map. So there's a little button here, it's called layers. If you click on that, this menu opens up and you get all these options, and you can search for something, for example, threatened fauna. You can add a layer by clicking on the green button, and then it will give you these little red dots for threatened fauna. So you click on the red dots, and in that case it shows you there's been a swift parrot sighting in the Devonport Bluff. So that's a really great tool. Just play around. I spend way too much time looking on the list map in my free time. I'm sure there are other people who just get stuck on that. So yeah, look in your local area, you'll see what's been recorded there already. There are a couple of great examples of citizen science projects in Tassie that you can get involved with. Two of them, for example, they use iNaturalist. There's one recording mallard ducks in their hybrids, one recording platypus. There's a great salt marsh monitoring project that Vishnu is here in the conference today as well. He's working on that. They use their own app for that. Globally, that number is globally. There are now almost 2,000 research papers using data from iNaturalist. So you can see, if you're contributing to that, you're making observations through iNaturalist, you're really contributing to something that is being used by scientists. And one recent example from Tassie is this paper, I think is under review at the moment, that's using iNaturalist data on feather deer population in Tasmania. A couple of things to keep in mind. First, I don't have time. Okay, so I gotta hurry up. First is ethics. So, you're working with other people potentially, so mutual respect, safety, that's important. And then environmental ethics, be aware that you're interacting with the natural environment. So some survey techniques are a bit more invasive than others. Generally think about what you're doing and be aware that you're potentially inflicting stress on animals or damaging plants if you're taking samples. So just try to be as careful as possible. There's laws and regulations. Not going into detail again. If you're unsure about the laws, especially in natural reserves and so on, it's probably best to ask someone with experience. If you're wondering where to start, iNaturalist, I think, is a great way. You can just put it on your phone and go out and make some observations, and you'll get a hang of it. It doesn't need to be anything special, or you don't need to just have watched-tailed eagles in there or whatever. You can, just record an acacia or whatever plant you know. If you know the eucalypt in your backyard, so and you develop your skills with that. There's local Landcare groups. Obviously, if you want to get in touch with them, speak to the Landcare office or get in touch with them directly if you know them. And on social media, there are groups like Facebook on weeds and birds and other areas. That's great to get involved if you want to. We've got a website, Landcare Tasmania, with lots of resources where you find more about everything I spoke about today. And generally, we are always happy to talk to you. Just give us a call or send an email. Thanks very much.